on that.
Yeah, I'd suggest that it might be worthwhile to look at the concept of setting a goal for, say, 2018, getting a parity or close to parity, 90% of parity, and seeing how you're doing on achieving that. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Senator Block, may I respond as well?
Sure.
Yes.
This is related but not the same issue. I spoke with an assemblyman, actually the speaker, a few years ago, about a problem we were having with unlicensed people, mainly in the Spanish-speaking community. We had a lot of complaints, and the DRC is a good place to find out what the industry needs, as well as to try to get compliance on sanitation. And many of the people that came before us as owners for unlicensed activity complained about not being able to find anybody that could get a license because of not having Social Security numbers. So, very wisely, Senator Lara wrote a bill last year that allows a federal tax ID number to use instead of a Social Security number. And we're very cognizant that that is going to allow, and we're through the regulations on it, right?
No regulations. We implemented.
We implemented it, and we're actively putting information out. We do it at DRC. The inspectors are carrying information into the salons, and people will not only be able to do what they're already doing now, but do it legally, and they'll have a tax ID number, they'll be paying taxes, and along with the driver's license number, even become a bigger part of our community.
Thank you. Other questions from committees? I have a few follow-up on the same issue of the low passage rates in the Spanish exam, and it seems to me that responsibility lies with the schools. And I guess my real question is how you're planning to address that with the institutions. I mean, we basically will have students obviously going there, believing they're getting an education that will prepare them for the exam, and then finding out after the exam that they were not suitably either qualified or prepared. And so I think that the issue of literacy is an enormous issue. Spanish literacy, conversational Spanish may be conversational Spanish. There may be a huge literacy gap in Spanish. And so it seems to me that part of your plan to follow up on Senator Block's comments would be to require the schools to actually institute, a program that would help their students who are paying to go there to actually achieve their goals, and that literacy training, or at least, specific focused help around the terminology that's unique to cosmetology has to be part of the curriculum now. So I think there's a solution there, and the solution probably is not tinkering with the exam, but it's actually looking at the education side of it and addressing the issues of literacy. And I think there's a tremendous advantage. I mean, literacy is not rocket science. It can be addressed, and it isn't necessarily a highly costly issue, and it's a huge advantage to the student, not only in pursuit of their license, but in pursuit of everything, for their quality of life, and for that of their family. We know when an adult achieves literacy, it has a direct impact on the educational outcomes for their children. And so I think it's a very worthy, it's like we want the number up, but actually we really want to see the success of all these potential licensees and their family. We want them to have that opportunity. And so it's a very critical issue that I'm hoping there would be some very clear direction to the institutions, and maybe some, however you word it, the requirements that prior to taking tuition, they will be addressing these issues, and that they will have performance goals in terms of their education. So there's my little spiel on that. But also on the 1,600 hours, I had a question because you brought up the issue of an early written exam, and we all know. I mean, if it was me, I'd want to take the exam right away too, because we all know our short-term memory, is a little sharper than, your comprehension has to be a lot deeper to actually remember something longer. any math test I would ever take, I'd want to take it 10 minutes after someone showed me how to do it. I don't know that that's the best. I mean, the problem you have there is you're kind of saying these people are all going to forget what was in that written, what was in that written exam. How do you address the issue that it's, it would help them maybe, and maybe they forget it, but do we want them to forget the information? And if they're going to forget it, how important is it in the first place?
I believe the intent, though, is because it's the type of industry it is. It's very hands-on, it's very creative, and they're in practicing the health and safety standards on what we call the school's clinic floor. So they're providing services to consumers in the school setting. And then they have the practical examination that's administered by our board upon completion. And so I think that's the thought behind that is the industry is definitely more hands-on. So we don't think that they're necessarily forgetting the health and safety aspect that they're learning in the beginning of their schooling, but that maybe it could be beneficial for them to take that written portion of the test. And just the written portion, we do believe they're practicing all the practical portions that for consumer safety while they're in school, and then we test that in the practical examination when they get out. So that's kind of the thought behind that, is that it's more of a creative industry, and the hands-on, they are retaining that information because they're actually practicing it and not so much in the books towards the end of their schooling.
I understand that, and I don't see a problem with that. I guess I would be interested in kind of you maybe revisiting the whole process of the written, and also, how many hours of practical are necessary. I think, just to go back to my earlier point, I think you could be creative in even how examinations are given. There can be oral exams. If somebody does have a literacy issue, you can give an oral exam. I think there's just an opportunity here.
Yes.
To say that we don't always have to just continue doing what we've done because we've always done it, and I think you do have some flexibility in how you look at this entire issue of helping the licensees become more successful, and because I don't think we want to set up artificial barriers. A final question is just on your coordination with the Department of Corrections. I wanted to highlight the fact that you have there are programs, particularly in some of our women's institutions, that I think are excellent. Are you looking at expanding that partnership? Yes. I bet you've been on a ride along.
I've been encouraging that, and actually
Good.
I met with a community college. Now that we have realignment, many of our prisoners spend 2 years in the county institutions. My county's building a new jail. I've spoken with all the supervisors. They already do food training program where there are sharp instruments. It's easy to control that in and out of the classroom. If the community colleges are willing to, and there's money available, they would be willing to do the training. We can test them at the local level too. So I think it's an opportunity with realignment to really, and the beauty of doing that is, think about this.
No pun intended.
Yeah, well, maybe or maybe not. So if you're getting out of jail and you're applying for a job, you've got to write down all of your felonies. And usually that ends up, especially in a tight job market, that you don't get hired.
Right.
But if all you have to do is rent a chair, then you can go right to work.
Yep. I think there's tremendous opportunity there too.
And it's very minimal cost to our board. We send our own staff to the correctional facilities, so it's really just the cost of travel. It's done in a day, and it's been very successful. So we're hoping that the Department of Corrections could possibly expand and offer the programs in more facilities, because the facilities that they do offer the programs in are run very well, and they've been really successful.
Well, I would love to, see those discussions take place between the board and the Department of Corrections, and then also to follow up on your excellent suggestion of the county solution with the community colleges and our county jails, also looking at expanding their programs. And so this is an area, I think, where you have probably a lot of interested legislators, who have the relationships at the local levels, that we'd be happy to help and work with you on really promoting that kind of expansion. So please, please work with all of us on those issues as well. So don't see any other questions. And, oh, yes, Assemblymember Ting.
Well, thank you so much for joining us here today. My apologies for running a little late. I was interested in hearing a little bit more about the reasons that you aren't collecting data around limited English-speaking businesses. I mean, in particular, you oversee the nail salon industry, which is, I think it's something like 90% owned by Vietnamese Americans, and really want to understand better how has it worked in terms of your ability to communicate with them, your ability to also educate them about what the various protocols are. We've heard instances where notices were sent in English regarding fines or really code violations, but since they weren't able to really understand even what they were, they weren't able to comply. So obviously knowing that you have a very specific population, very targeted in this area, would like to know what you're doing about it.
So we don't collect it because we just don't have the statutory authority to collect it. There was a bill just a few years ago that we had supported that was going to allow that, but it did not make it through the process. We do also, we've done a few things specifically for that, for the issues that you've raised. One, we translated our inspection report. When an inspector goes into a salon, they fill out an inspection report of the violations that they see, and they provide that to the individual licensees as well as the owner. It's in English. So we translated that particular form into Vietnamese as sort of a separate handout, so that at least someone who's receiving that inspection report right then and there knows what the violations are immediately. We haven't translated citations because we don't have language information in our system, so we wouldn't know what language to translate it into. However, we have added information to our citations to please call our office, because we have an interpreter service that we can use to help it go through the citation. And we have had that. We have had people call to where we're able to at least go through it with them and explain the actual violations so that helps them make those corrections. Our town hall meetings with the Vietnamese community have been successful. We try to do them annually, and it helps to put a face of our board in that type of setting, and it helps to really talk about the regulations so that they can understand why they're there and how to correct them. We've been focusing on how to correct the violations before they happen so that they don't get the violations.
So just out of curiosity, so you're saying that is there statutory authority forbidding you from collecting this information? Why would you need statutory authority to get this information?
Well, we wouldn't be able to require it unless we had the authority to require it.
But you could ask them voluntarily to.
We could ask voluntarily, and then we would have to look at how we would collect that data and put it into our systems to be able to determine that, make the data change.
And are there plans to do that this year?
To do voluntarily?
Or to look at how to compile the data also if you have a limited English...
There haven't been plans to do it this year only because, yet. That's because we are in Breeze, and so we're one of the first rollouts of Breeze, and so we're just stabilized that system. So now we're at the point to where we can look into the future to what we could do to enhance our licensing programs.
So if you get a call, I mean, I guess for you to say, I'm a little bit puzzled when you say that you're not sure what languages to translate it into because you don't have the data. I mean, I think, if you work with the population, you can clearly see how there's one dominant population that does this business. Clearly, there's a significant need. I'd be interested if you get a call from a shop owner who has a hard time speaking English but speaks Vietnamese. How do you handle those types of conversations?
We do have Vietnamese-speaking staff. We have Vietnamese and Spanish-speaking staff in our office that could take those calls, or we have an interpreter service. Usually we will try to ask the person, or usually the person will ask us if there's a person who speaks Vietnamese or Spanish or any other language.
Great. So, I mean, I'd love to, obviously, this hearing is just about a very, very broad hearing. I'd love to have further conversations about how we can work together to really expand those options and
That'd
those services. Thank you.
We've also done the self-inspection reports.
We've done everything.
We have self-inspection. One of the things that happens at the DRC hearing is that we have staff members there. We actually take that time to educate people. And some people, even though we request that they meet with staff after we're done, leave anyway. But we have self-inspection reports that are in Vietnamese, and that trains them step by step how to go through their salon in their language and find out what a violation is. The other issue is that what really doesn't take a great deal of language, because it's all see and do, is that we have a YouTube video that shows how to clean in detail a foot spa from step to step. We've had outreach meetings in the Vietnamese community. I've attended them. We're really interested in doing this, and if you can direct us in anything you want to do, like what we did with the DRC backlog, we'll do it.
We'd be happy to. I worked very closely with the Nail Salon Collaborative on one of my bills last year, so would be happy to. And I think it's great to use YouTube and technology. It's obviously cheap and very user-friendly, so I think the more of that you can do is wonderful.
Thank you. Just one final quick question on pro rata. How do you feel? You're probably at the highest end in terms of your relationship with DCA and the services they're providing you. Any feedback on that?
Well, the services they provide us are a lot more than other boards. So our services are very sufficient. They're very helpful to us. Obviously, if I were to not have DCA, I would have a much larger staff and would need a much larger building. So, our relationship is great with them, and they have expertise that we don't have in our office, and so we rely heavily on them, and it's been sufficient.
Okay, so the value is there for the support you're paying for.
Right.
Good. Great. Well, thank you. We're going to have public comment now.
Let me stay.
Welcome.
Madam Chair,
yes.
Members of the Joint Committee, my name is Fred Jones. I'm here on behalf of the Professional Beauty Federation of California, which basically represents every sector of the industry. And it's a small industry. It's quite large. I will say that when the state board was, if you will, promoted from a bureau to a board a little over a decade ago, we had some hiccups working with that board. But over the course of the last decade, this board has become an incredible, cordial, inclusive agency. In fact, I would argue one of the most well-run DCA agencies around.
That's right.
As a result of our cooperative relationship, we actually, as an industry association, support all 5 of the statutory recommendations, or requests, rather, that the State Board has made. I'll just highlight a couple of them, if I may. I think, Madam Chair, you hit upon the issue vis-a-vis low Spanish test scores that Senator Block alluded to earlier. It really is a function of schools more so than the State Board. The State Board is limited in what they can do in schools because there is another DCA agency that also regulates schools. We have been asking for over a decade that duplicative oversight go away. We believe that good schools will be better served by having one DCA sheriff in town, and that sheriff should be the State Board of Barbering and Cosmetology. They already control the curriculum, the licensing exam. They're in our schools every year inspecting facilities and equipment, etc. And by the way, they don't even receive any fees from schools to do that service. In sharp contrast to the Bureau of Private Post-Secondary Education, which rarely comes to our schools. And when they are presented with fraudulent activities by schools, and there are some that are frauds, they do next to nothing about. And even when they do something, they don't inform our State Board of Barbering and Cosmetology. So there are some real problems. You don't have to take industry's word for it. You don't have to just take the State Board's word for it. The State Auditor General had a scathing report just last year.
Right,
on the
and
BPD.
we will deal with that, and we'll have a whole hearing on them. So don't
Fair
worry,
enough.
they're coming back in May.
All right. Well, we just think it would be a very simple transition. Give the State Board the authority to protect students, which, by the way, the students, when they are defrauded by a school, they call this agency. They don't know the Bureau of Private Post-Secondary Education even exists, if they can even spell it.
Well, I know it's a horrible acronym. I can't stand it. So
Well, it used
they
to
need
be longer.
change their name.
It used to be the vocational education. So, another issue, there's a couple licensing reform requests from the State Board. One is to deal with the independent contractor status, or what we call in our trade the booth rental phenomenon. And we have, over the years, finally gravitated to the side of supporting a separate license for these independent contractors. So we support a booth rental license. Also, you heard Vice President Hedges mention the freelance certificate. We think, again, the statutes need to keep up with the industry realities, and freelancing is one of those realities that our statutes have not kept pace with. So we support that as well. With regard to the early testing, you asked a couple of questions. We are a dexterity-based industry. We're not right brain typically. We're typically artists. And all of the theory written instruction happens in what our regulations refer to as the freshman period, which happens usually the first third of every educational institution's program. And so the last two-thirds, they're learning to apply the theory in technical competencies and hands-on application. So the idea of an early written exam is simply to take advantage of the school procedure of this is when you receive your theory, and then shortly thereafter, if they can start taking the written exam, would be helpful. And then at the end of their 1600 or 1200 or whatever program they're pursuing, whether cosmetology, barbering, manicuring, etc., then they can take the practical, which puts both the theory and the practical together in one exam. And then finally, I'll just mention on the Vietnamese issue that Assemblymember Ting brought up. I'm sad to say that the first Vietnamese American board president was not recently reappointed by the governor. That's very frustrating to me because Christy Truc Tran did an incredible job of outreaching to that community, went to all of those Orange County meetings. At DRC was probably the toughest member on the board, making sure people weren't using culture or language as an excuse for not following our regulations, and she could see the difference. And so only this month was I informed by the governor's office that she wasn't being reappointed. So that's frustrating. But this board has done yeoman work in reaching out to all the various communities of our 500,000 licensees. And Assemblymember Ting, you can take Ms. Underwood's word, because her word is solid, that she will continue. And we are very grateful, in fact, for the leadership of this board, most especially their executive officer. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, welcome.
Good morning, committee members. My name is Catherine Porter. I'm the policy director of the California Healthy Nail Salon Collaborative. The collaborative comprises approximately 40 public health and environmental advocates, salon workers, and owners and allies in government agencies. We focus on reproductive and environmental justice and health for the nail salon community, and also we do a lot of work on language access. Director Underwood indicated that 90 to 95% of all manicurist licensees are Vietnamese speaking. Manicurists comprise at least 16% of all of the board's licensees. The Dimely Aleatory Bilingual Services Act requires that state agencies provide a level of language access for Californians who cannot communicate effectively in English, who make up only 5% or more of their constituents. So as much as we appreciate the progress that has been made by the Board of Barbering and Cosmetology, There is a strong legal mandate for language access to be provided to this language community within the nail salon community. We have some specific recommendations. We reviewed the Sunset report and the recommendations by the staff and some of the issues raised, and we'd like to just articulate those quickly. Given the high percentage of Vietnamese limited English proficient manicurists, we believe that it should be the default for all communications that come out of the board from the BBC to manicurists, given that 90 to 95% of those individuals speak Vietnamese, that those written communications be automatically translated into both English and Vietnamese. There is no need to gather information, even gather preferences from individuals within the manicure licensing community, because we already know that they are predominantly, if not completely, Vietnamese speaking. We believe that this would be the most effective way to approach the language access issue and not have to gather records or keep records of which individuals speak Vietnamese and which do not. We do believe, though, as the Assemblymember Ting raised, the issue of collecting information voluntarily regarding language preference would be a great idea, and gather that information at the time that a licensee applies for their application or their renewal. And, of course, if that information is gathered, then that preference would have to be honored and accommodated by the board. We believe that at all formal hearings, an interpreter should be provided if requested, and that the cost of the interpreter is borne by the agency. Currently, the law on this issue is fairly vague and even leaves the ultimate decision up to the ALJ in a formal hearing situation as to who covers the cost of an interpreter. We believe that the law should be made clear that at least at formal hearings, an interpreter should be provided by the state. And we would also encourage thinking about this policy to provide interpreters at the state's cost, even at disciplinary review committee hearings, which are characterized as informal hearings, but clearly action does take place at that. Issues can be resolved at that level. If communication was improved, then it may remove the necessity for a formal hearing.
Okay.
We also believe that in regard to inspectors, on-site inspectors, there needs to be developed a language access protocol that inspectors are trained on. I in the last year, spoke to a couple of inspectors, asked them what happens when they go into a nail salon and people do not speak English or speak Vietnamese. The responses that I got from both of those individuals were different. One of the people even said, well, they usually speak English. So it was as if they just barrel ahead and assume that the person really can speak English, but she or he kind of acts like they speak Vietnamese and can't understand.
Thanks. In the interest of time, we just need to wrap up so we can get to our next public comment.
Yes. So we believe there needs to be a protocol developed. The health and safety curriculum needs to be revised sooner rather than later. LOHP, the agency at UC Berkeley, stands ready, I think, to work on that curriculum, but hasn't been contacted since about December 2013. And we think the idea of requiring that at least some of the board members be licensed professionals is a great idea that the staff raised. Thank you very much for your time.